As I stepped into the bustling terminal, the familiar scent of coffee and the hum of excited chatter washed over me. I pulled my hoodie tighter around me, feeling the fabric against my skin as I navigated through the crowd. My heart raced a little. It wasn't just another flight for me. It felt like a leap into the unknown, a chance to escape the shadows of my recent struggles, even if just for a few hours. I glanced at my watch, realizing I had a little time before boarding. I took a deep breath, trying to quell the anxiety bubbling beneath my calm exterior. The airport was alive with people, each in their own world, and yet I felt like an outsider, blending in with my simple jeans and hoodie. I wasn't wearing a suit, and for a brief moment, I wondered if that would matter. As I approached the gate, I saw the boarding announcement flash across the screen. First class boarding. My heart sank slightly. I was about to step into a space where appearances often dictated respect and treatment. I joined the line, my hands gripping the boarding pass tightly, as if it were a lifeline. Next. The attendant smiled brightly as I approached. I noticed the way her eyes flickered over my attire, a hint of judgment lurking beneath her cheerful facade. "Welcome aboard, sir. First class, right?" "Yes," I replied, trying to maintain a polite smile, even as I felt the weight of her gaze. Once on the plane, I settled into my seat, grateful for the space but acutely aware of the other passengers around me. I could feel their eyes, some curious, others disapproving, as I tucked my backpack under the seat. I took a moment to breathe, focusing on the seatbelt click, the sounds of the overhead compartments closing, the murmur of conversations. Then Sarah Thompson, the flight attendant, began making her rounds, greeting passengers with a warmth that felt rehearsed. "Welcome aboard. Enjoy your flight." But as she approached my row, that bright smile faltered. I held my breath, sensing the shift. "Nice hoodie," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I hope you're comfortable flying in style." There was an awkward silence that hung in the air, heavy with disbelief. I could feel the eyes of nearby passengers shifting between us, the tension thickening like fog. I managed a weak chuckle, trying to brush off her comment. "Thanks, it's warm," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I mean, it's first class, you know?" She continued, her voice rising slightly as if she wanted everyone to hear. "Maybe save the casual look for economy?" I blinked, caught off guard by her lack of professionalism. My heart raced. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck, a mix of embarrassment and anger. "I'm fine, really," I said, but she wasn't finished. "Sure you are," she insisted, her eyes narrowing slightly, "but I can't help but wonder if you even belong here." The words hung in the air, and I could sense the ripple of reactions from the surrounding passengers. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others watched with a mix of curiosity and judgment. My mind raced. I wasn't just any passenger. I was the owner of this airline, but how could I reveal that now? "Excuse me?" I finally said, my voice rising a notch, trying to keep my composure. "Just saying, it's a bit surprising, that's all," she shot back, crossing her arms as if waiting for a retort. I felt the heat of the moment building, my chest tightening with a mix of disbelief and frustration. How had it come to this? A simple flight, and yet here I was, confronted with a blatant display of prejudice. I glanced around, catching the eyes of a few passengers who seemed to share my discomfort, but no one spoke up. "Look, I just want to enjoy my flight," I said, my voice steadying. "Can we just move on?" The cabin felt charged with tension, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, echoing the unspoken support and disbelief from the other passengers. I was prepared for the storm that was brewing, but I had no idea how this confrontation would ripple into something far beyond this flight. As the plane lifted off the ground, I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with takeoff. But today, that thrill was overshadowed by an unsettling tension that had settled in my stomach. The roar of the engines faded into the background as I tried to focus on my breathing, reminding myself that I was just another passenger on this flight. I glanced around, noting the faces of my fellow travelers, some absorbed in their screens, others chatting quietly. But my eyes soon found Sarah again, the flight attendant whose earlier comments still stung like a fresh wound. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. she announced cheerfully, her voice echoing through the cabin. But as she caught sight of me, her demeanor shifted. "I hope everyone is enjoying their first-class experience," she added, her eyes narrowing slightly as they settled on me. "Though you certainly don't seem to belong here." A few heads turned, and I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. I wanted to shrink into my seat, to disappear among the plush cushions and warm blankets, but I forced myself to remain composed. "Excuse me?" I managed, my voice steady despite the embarrassment clawing at me. "Oh, don't play coy," Sarah continued, her tone dripping with condescension. "It's just surprising to see someone like you in first class. I mean, it's not every day we have someone dressed like that up here." She gestured dismissively toward my hoodie and jeans, and I sensed the murmurs starting to ripple through the cabin. "Excuse me, I think that's uncalled for," a voice piped up from a few rows back. It was an older gentleman, his brow furrowed in disapproval. "You shouldn't judge someone based on their appearance." I turned to look at him, surprised but grateful for his intervention. "Thank you," I said, feeling a flicker of warmth spread through me. Maybe I wasn't entirely alone in this. Sarah's expression darkened. "I'm just doing my job, sir. If you can't handle the truth, maybe you should reconsider your own choices in life," she shot back, her voice rising slightly, and the plane felt smaller somehow, the atmosphere thickening with tension. "Truth?" I echoed, incredulous. "You call that truth? You're just being rude." My heart raced, and I could feel the sympathetic eyes of other passengers on me, some nodding in agreement with the older gentleman. She scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "You know, it's not my fault if you're offended. Maybe you should think about how you present yourself." The murmurs grew louder, and I could hear snippets of conversations, whispers of disbelief and indignation. "What's wrong with her? Can you believe this? This is first class, for heaven's sake." I took a deep breath, weighing my options. Should I escalate this? Confront her more directly? Or should I let it slide and focus on the flight? I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to center myself. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Just as I was about to respond, a woman seated diagonally across from me stood up, her face set in determination. "Excuse me, miss. I think what you're doing is completely unacceptable. You have no right to treat anyone like that, regardless of how they're dressed." A wave of relief washed over me, and I felt the tension in my chest begin to ease. "Thank you," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. Sarah's face turned a deep shade of red, and she snapped back. "And who do you think you are to speak to me like that? I'm just doing my job." "Your job is to serve all passengers with respect," the woman replied firmly, her voice unwavering. "You need to check your own bias before calling someone out for theirs." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted, and I could feel a sense of solidarity starting to grow. Other passengers began to nod in agreement, and I could see them exchanging glances, some even whispering words of support. I looked back at Sarah, whose facade of confidence was cracking under the mounting pressure. "You've embarrassed him in front of all of us," the older gentleman added, his tone firm yet calm. "That's not how we treat people." I could hardly believe what was happening. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I wouldn't have to face this alone after all. As the plane began its descent, a palpable tension filled the cabin. I could feel the weight of every gaze on me, and the whispers that rippled through the rows were like daggers. Sarah, the flight attendant, was still fuming, her face flushed with indignation that I dared to challenge her authority. I'd faced my share of prejudice in life, but I never expected it to manifest in such a blatant, public way. "Sir, I need you to remain seated and keep your voice down," Sarah barked at me, her tone dripping with condescension. "You're not above the rules just because you're sitting in first class." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "I'm expressing my dissatisfaction with your treatment," I said firmly, my voice steady. "This isn't just about me. It's about how you treat people based on their appearance." "Look, I don't know what you're trying to prove," she snapped back, crossing her arms defiantly. "But you're making a scene, and it's inappropriate." The murmurs swelled, and I could see a few passengers nodding in agreement with me. One older woman, her silver hair pulled back into a tight bun, leaned over from the aisle seat. "Young man, you have every right to speak up. This is unacceptable," she said, her voice laced with sympathy. "Thank you," I replied, feeling a surge of strength from her support. It was like a spark igniting a flame. More passengers began to chime in, voicing their agreement. "Yeah, she's being ridiculous," a man in a business suit added, his brow furrowed in displeasure. "I've seen people in far worse attire in first class." Furious, Sarah's eyes darted around the cabin as if she were searching for allies. "I'm just doing my job," she insisted, but her confidence was waning. "Your job is to treat all passengers with respect, regardless of their clothing," another passenger interjected, his voice firm. The realization struck me. I wasn't alone. This wasn't just my battle. It was a collective stand against the ignorance that so often goes unchecked. I could feel my heart racing, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The power dynamics had begun to shift, and I was no longer the lone target of Sarah's vitriol. As the plane touched down, I could finally breathe a sigh of relief, but I wasn't ready to let it go just yet. I gathered my belongings, still acutely aware of the tension that hung in the air. As I stood to exit, I heard Sarah mutter under her breath, "Typical. People like him don't belong in first class anyway." Anger flared within me, but I held my tongue. I refused to let her words affect me further. I stepped into the aisle and headed toward the front of the plane, feeling the weight of the moment. The passengers who had supported me offered reassuring smiles, and it felt like a small victory. Once I disembarked, I took a moment to collect myself outside the jet bridge. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket. I pulled it out, and my heart dropped as I saw the barrage of notifications. Social media was exploding with posts about the incident. Videos, photos, and comments flooded my screen, and I felt the overwhelming swell of outrage from people I didn't even know. "Did you see what happened? That flight attendant was awful," one message read. Another said, "I can't believe they let her treat him like that. This is so wrong." I felt a rush of emotions, anger, sadness, and a strange sense of empowerment. I had never intended for this to become a spectacle, but I realized I had an opportunity here. People were rallying against the very thing I had experienced. The world was watching, and perhaps, just perhaps, this could spark a real conversation about the systemic racism that still pervaded our society. As I walked away from the terminal, I knew this was far from over. I was ready to confront not only Sarah's actions but the larger issues at play. My heart was pounding with determination, and I could feel the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. The narrative was shifting, and I was ready to take part in writing a new chapter, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been silenced. I stood in the living room of my modest apartment, my phone buzzing incessantly on the coffee table, surrounded by a sea of notifications. The incident on the flight had spiraled into a full-blown media frenzy. News outlets were buzzing, social media was ablaze, and my name, though still unknown to many, was beginning to echo in the public sphere. I took a deep breath, my chest tightening as I scrolled through the barrage of comments, shares, and heated debates. Each notification was a reminder of the humiliation I had endured just hours ago at the hands of Sarah Thompson, the flight attendant whose prejudice was laid bare for all to see. I had wanted to simply fly home, to escape the weight of my recent struggles, but instead, I had become a symbol of something much larger, a reflection of the insidious racism that still plagued society. A news anchor's voice broke through my thoughts, reporting on the viral incident. Passengers described the scene as shocking and disgraceful, with many calling for immediate action against the airline. My heart raced as the screen flashed images of the airplane, the cabin in chaos, reflecting the anger of those who had witnessed Sarah's tirade. Suddenly, my phone rang. It was David, my best friend and confidant. "Marcus, you watching this?" His voice was urgent, filled with concern. "You're trending. People are defending you left and right. This is huge." "I'm aware," I replied, my voice low. "But it's not just about me. It's about what happened, the way people are treated. I don't want to be just a trending topic." "Then do something about it. You have the platform now. This is your chance to speak up," David urged. You can change things. He was right. I could feel the momentum building, the energy of a movement stirring underneath the surface. I know, I said, determination taking root in my gut. I just need to figure out how to approach this. As I hung up, I realized that the time had come for me to step out of the shadows. The world needed to see me, not just as a victim, but as someone who could inspire change. My mind raced with thoughts of my identity, my position as the airline owner, and the responsibility that came with it. Meanwhile, Sarah was facing her own reckoning. I envisioned her sitting in a sterile conference room, her face pale as she confronted her superiors about the fallout. I imagined their worried expressions, the whispers of concern filling the air. "We need to downplay this," one of them might say. "This could hurt our reputation." But could they truly downplay the truth? Sarah's actions had sparked an outrage that was impossible to ignore. As I imagined her sitting there, I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me. She had underestimated me, and now it was my turn to rise. Hours later, I sat at my desk, the light of my laptop illuminating the room. With every keystroke, I poured my heart into a post that I hoped would resonate with people. Today, I was publicly humiliated on a flight because of the color of my skin. I typed, my fingers flying across the keyboard. But I am not just a victim. I am the owner of this airline, and I refuse to stand by while others are treated with disrespect. I paused, my heart racing as I continued. Racism has no place in our society, and it certainly has no place in my company. We must hold ourselves accountable and strive for a culture of respect and dignity for everyone. As I finished, I took a moment to reread my words. I felt a rush of hope and fear intertwine within me. Clicking post, I knew that I was stepping into a storm, but it was a storm I was ready to face. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone who had ever been belittled, shamed, or overlooked. The notifications began to flood in again. Likes, shares, comments of support. I felt a surge of hope as I realized that perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of something transformative. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I was no longer alone. I had the strength of those who stood with me, and together, we could spark a change that rippled through the airline and beyond. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders. I was ready to embrace the fight for justice, for equality. I was ready to be the change. As I stood at the podium, I could feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. The press conference was set to begin, and the air buzzed with anticipation, journalists scribbling notes, cameras flashing, and the murmur of voices swirling around me. The room was packed, a sea of faces eager to hear what I had to say. I took a deep breath, preparing to address not only the media, but also the countless individuals who had rallied behind me after the incident with Sarah. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "Today, I stand before you not just as the owner of this airline, but as a man who believes in respect, dignity, and equality for all." I glanced around the room, making eye contact with several reporters. What happened on that flight was not just an embarrassment for me. It was a reflection of a deeper issue that exists within our society and, unfortunately, within our company. As I spoke, I could feel the energy shift. The reporters leaned in, their pens poised above their notepads, eager to capture every word. I want to be clear, I am calling for accountability. The behavior exhibited by Sarah Thompson was unacceptable, and it cannot be tolerated in any workplace, especially one that prides itself on customer service and inclusivity. I paused for a moment, allowing my words to sink in. I could see nods of agreement from some of the audience. Effective immediately, I am advocating for Sarah's dismissal. This is not just about one flight attendant. It's about the culture we cultivate within our company. We need to do better. I envision a workplace where every employee feels valued, regardless of their background. We must implement comprehensive diversity training and create an environment that fosters respect and understanding. The room erupted into a flurry of questions, each reporter vying for a chance to ask about the future of the airline, about Sarah, about the changes I promised. One reporter stood up, her voice cutting through the noise. "What concrete steps will you take to ensure this doesn't happen again?" I nodded, appreciating the urgency of her question. First, we will establish a task force dedicated to reviewing our policies and training programs. We will seek input from employees at all levels to ensure their voices are heard. Second, I will personally oversee the implementation of new initiatives aimed at promoting diversity and inclusion. This is not just a response to a crisis, it's a commitment to change. Another journalist chimed in. What do you say to those who believe this is just a public relations stunt? I leaned into the microphone, feeling the heat of the moment. I understand the skepticism, and I welcome it. Actions speak louder than words, and I promise you that I will be held accountable. We will publish regular updates on our progress, and I encourage everyone to hold me and this company accountable. It's time for transparency, and I believe that starts with me. As I concluded my statement, I felt a mixture of relief and determination. I had laid out my vision, and now it was time to put it into action. The path ahead would not be easy, but I was resolved to make a change. As I stepped away from the podium, a wave of applause filled the room, and for a moment, I felt a sense of hope. After the press conference, I was swarmed by reporters seeking additional comments, but I managed to escape, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. I found myself in a quiet corner of the building, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I pulled out my phone to check social media, and my heart raced as I saw the overwhelming support flooding in. People were sharing my message, echoing my calls for justice, and I knew that this was just the beginning. Yet, I was also acutely aware of the challenges ahead. The board had reluctantly agreed to suspend Sarah pending an investigation, but I knew that this was only a small victory in a much larger fight. The wheels of change were turning, but I could feel the resistance lurking just beneath the surface. This was not just about one flight attendant. It was about dismantling the systemic issues that allowed such behavior to flourish. Marcus. I turned to see my colleague, Julia, approaching me with a wide smile. You were amazing out there. People are really responding to your message. Thanks, Julia, I replied, my voice tinged with exhaustion. But it's going to take more than just a speech. We need to follow through. I know, she said, her expression shifting to one of seriousness. But I believe in you. We all do. Change is possible, and you're leading the way. Her words ignited a spark within me. I could feel the weight of responsibility, but I was no longer alone in this fight. I had a team, and together, we would challenge the status quo and strive for a better future. The battle for justice and change was just beginning, and I was ready to face it head-on. As the investigation into Sarah unfolded, the air was thick with tension at the airline's headquarters. It felt surreal to be at the center of this storm, yet I was determined to see it through. I sat in my office, staring at the screens filled with news articles and social media posts. The hashtags #JusticeForMarcus and #StopRacism in the airlines were plastered everywhere, trending globally. I felt a mix of pride and sadness. Pride that people were rallying for change, and sadness for what had happened to me and countless others. Marcus, we have more allegations coming in, my assistant, Lisa, said as she entered my office, her brows furrowed with concern. It seems Sarah has quite a history of discriminatory behavior. I glanced at her, my heart heavy. What do you mean? Passengers are coming forward with stories similar to yours. They're sharing their experiences of being treated poorly by her. She hesitated, then added, It's not just about you anymore. It's about everyone she's affected. The gravity of the situation pressed down on me. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a systemic issue. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. Let's compile these testimonies. We need to present them clearly. This is bigger than just a flight incident. It's about changing the culture of this airline. Lisa nodded, her resolve matching mine. I'll get the documentation started. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. As the days passed, the public outrage intensified. News outlets were relentless, digging deeper into Sarah's background. It was during one of these investigative reports that a shocking twist emerged. Sarah's social media history was uncovered. Racist comments, derogatory jokes, and a series of posts that painted a damning picture of her character. I watched the news broadcast in disbelief, my heart racing. Can you believe it? Lisa exclaimed, pacing the floor. How could she be so careless? I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and empathy. It's terrifying how ingrained these attitudes are. She thought she could get away with it because she was in a position of power. But this is what happens when you're not held accountable. The airline was left with no choice. The board convened an emergency meeting, and the mood was grim. I was present, ready to present the evidence we'd gathered. As I stood in front of the board members, I could see the fear in their eyes. They knew they were at a crossroads. Today's not just about Sarah, I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. It's about the culture we foster within this company. If we don't take a stand against this type of behavior, we're complicit. We have to show our employees and our customers that we value dignity and respect above all else. The room was silent, tension crackling in the air. Finally, the chairperson spoke. We have no choice but to terminate her. This is unacceptable. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was just the beginning. As the news broke about Sarah's termination, it felt like a turning point, not just for the airline, but for the industry as a whole. I received a flood of messages of support and solidarity from employees and passengers alike. In the aftermath, I found myself reflecting on the power of standing up against racism. I realized that my journey didn't end with Sarah's dismissal. It was just the beginning. I began drafting new policies for the airline, implementing mandatory diversity training, and creating a task force dedicated to fostering an inclusive environment. One evening, as I sat in my office, I received a call from a former employee. Marcus, thank you for what you're doing. It feels like we finally have someone who cares. I smiled, feeling a sense of purpose. We're building a new future together. This is about all of us. As I looked out the window, watching planes take off into the sunset, I felt hopeful. Change was possible, and it started with each of us standing together. We were on the path to creating a better future, not just for the airline, but for everyone who traveled with us. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to lead the way.